It's safe to say Pokémon Sword and Shield are the most divisive titles in the series to date, and they've effectively split the fandom into two sides. The side that thinks Generation 8 is a clumsy mess, and the side that thinks the other half of the fandom is overreacting. Personally, I found myself disappointed with Sword and Shield for a variety of reasons, but for brevity's sake, I just felt that they were the most lacking entries in the series. Considering the stripped Pokédex, lack of interesting post-game content, wonky storyline, unengaging raid battles, and the sparse wild area. This isn't to say that there aren't some cool new additions and some really great Pokemon designs, but I just found the game to be unfulfilling and unpolished. Then the Sword and Shield DLC, the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, were announced, both promising a return of many of the Pokemon excluded from Sword and Shield's Pokédex, and even a whole new wild area to explore in each of the DLCs. After the initial trailer, I was so glad that we were getting some much needed updates and fixes to the games. However, I found myself skeptical that the DLC would actually solve the problems that I and many others have with Generation 8. More importantly, I am not exactly keen on celebrating an expanded Pokédex and what looks like a replacement for post-game story that we now have to pay an additional cost for. Given that these things were at one time expected free content throughout the series' history, I can't help but think that many features have been purposely removed to sell them back to players as DLC, knowing full well many of us will pay extra money for our old Pokemon and to fill in for the lack of narrative depth. Looking at the Isle of Armor, 107 Pokemon return to the games, players can explore a whole new wild area, and a new legendary Pokemon named Kubfu is introduced, which truly seems like a promising amount of content. But does the Isle of Armor add a richer experience to the base games, or does it just provide more of the same? So let's take a gander at the news story. After buying the expansion pass, which, by the way, please be sure not to buy the wrong one, load up your game and you'll be given an armor pass. As long as you've visited the wild area in your playthrough, you can make use of the pass immediately and make your way over to the Isle of Armor. Depending on which game you own, you'll meet one of two new characters, Clara in Sword or Avery in Shield. You'll be prompted by one of the two to visit the Isle of Armor's dojo, where you'll begin training with Dojo Master Mustard. Yeah, that's his name and we're going with it. Anyway, as part of your training, you'll be given a variety of tasks. These range from fetch quests to classic Pokemon battles. The storyline primarily centers around the new legendary Pokemon Kubfu, which Mustard will give you fairly early on. After you've been given the new Cub Pokemon, your tasks become more focused on raising and befriending Kubfu. This culminates in a task which lets you choose whether you take on the Tower of Waters or the Tower of Darkness. Depending on which of the two towers you choose to take on, Kubfu will evolve into an Urshifu that is either a fighting water type or a fighting dark type respectively. Once you've evolved your Shifu, you go on another adventure with Hop and you unlock its ability to Gigantamax. Once you beat the new story, you unlock a new battle mode called Restricted Sparring Training in the Master Dojo, and with that, you've basically completed the Isle of Armor. In the end, the story took me about 6 hours to complete, but it can definitely be done much quicker than that if you aren't catching new Pokemon and are just focusing on the main story. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the features that Isle of Armor brings to Sword and Shield. The DLC has some notable features, but the biggest is probably the new wild area. For starters, there are actually caves and a forest and a marsh instead of just flat land. However, it's still not perfect. The overall emptiness is hard to ignore, and there's virtually nothing to do. No trainers, no breeder, no buildings, hardly any NPCs, just wild Pokemon popping in from time to time. To me, this just further exemplifies my problem with Generation 8 as a whole, feeling dull and less alive than anything in the previous generations. While not anything groundbreaking, there is one new little side quest that is similar to the Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild, and it's a bit of fun. Just before you reach the dojo, you'll come across a trainer who will task you with finding 150 Diglett that are scattered across the Isle of Armor. Now, initially, finding these little guys is pretty easy. They are literally everywhere. However, some of the Diglett are placed among flowers or in secluded locations on the map that can make them slightly harder to find. During my playthrough, I only really ran into trouble in the bigger areas like the sea biomes or the Fields of Honor, and I was able to track down all 150 in a few hours. The reward for returning all the Diglett are a handful of Alolan Pokemon, so if you're looking to complete your Pokedex, you'll definitely want to start hunting some Diglett. So what else does the DLC add? One significant gameplay change is that now you can unlock Gigantamax for eligible Pokemon. What this means is that you don't necessarily have to catch a Gigantamax Pokemon in a raid anymore. This is an awesome change, and one that players have wanted since the game's release. When I realized that the Corvid Knight and the Centiskorch that I journeyed with on the main story could never Gigantamax, I was heartbroken. Like many other players, I get attached to my main Pokemon team, so I hate having to replace them for random raid Pokemon, especially given how tedious raid battles are. So this is a late, but very welcome change. Another big addition is that follower Pokemon are back. Well, kind of. So Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee set the bar pretty high in this regard, but with a dex of only Kanto Pokemon, many fans were eager to see the feature return in Sword and Shield with a full Pokedex. Of course, this didn't happen on release, which was a bit of a letdown. For me personally, follower Pokemon are a pretty big deal, and they add a ton of immersion to the game. It's one of the many reasons Heart Gold and Soul Silver are my favorites in the series, so having the feature make a return in the DLC makes me very happy, even if it is purely aesthetic. However, there are a few drawbacks to the follower system. First and foremost, when you return to the base game wild areas or routes, you will not be able to have a follower Pokemon, which is a huge bummer. But even on the Isle of Armor, the feature is pretty bare bones. The last thing I want to note about follower Pokemon is that you can't hitch a ride on Rapidash or climb aboard your Snorlax's belly like in Let's Go. While I'm disappointed, I can't honestly say I was expecting the ability to ride a Gyarados or fly on a Charizard in Sword and Shield. Maybe we'll get to see some new ride Pokemon in a new DLC, but honestly, who knows. The thing that I love most about the Isle of Armor is restricted sparring. You unlock the battle mode after you beat the DLC's story, and it basically functions like a monotype Pokemon battle tower. The rules are simple. You pick 3 Pokemon of the same type, you can't have duplicate items on your team, and you try to win at least 5 battles in a row, though you can continue past 5 trainers for additional battle points. This doesn't seem like a lot, but like the battle tower, the AI is much smarter than your average NPC, and will make use of natures, field effects, and more competitive strategies to their advantage. You will only be able to heal your team twice, so you'll have to be wise about when you push onward with limited health or restore your team in between matches. For each trainer you defeat, you'll be given 3 battle points. For every 5 trainers, you'll get a hefty 30 battle points. The reward for winning 5 matches in each of the 18 types is laughably underwhelming, but ultimately I'm just glad the mode is here at all. I love the chances to experiment with and create more competitive teams, and monotype battles specifically are fun to play around with. I really enjoy when Pokemon gives us more competitive focused content, and while this mode isn't as intuitive as what we got in Gen 3 or Gen 7, it's definitely my favorite mode in Sword and Shield to date. Lastly, the DLC adds new hair and clothing styles to the mix, which is always a good thing. But I have to say the selection isn't exactly great. Overall, I'm happy to have more styles available, but I don't feel like there's enough diversity to fully personalize my trainer yet. While Isle of Armor's new features are mostly welcome, there are some things in the DLC that I really can't get behind. The main one being the story. Now, don't get me wrong, the additional story is very welcome, considering Sword and Shield seriously lacks meaningful post-game content, but I still find myself wanting more from the experience. The dojo storyline is not only very short, it's incredibly easy to get through, and it's mostly just a series of boring fetch quests and unexceptional trainer battles. Having already beaten the base game with a team of level 100 Pokemon, every challenge here was a breeze. Now, the missions involving Kubfu switch things up a little bit since you get it at level 10 and you have to grind it to 70, but this isn't exactly difficult or even very fun. It's actually a tedious task that is pretty indicative of the game's terrible level scaling. All of the wild Pokemon are at level 60 or over if you've already beaten the main game, which I'm pretty sure a good portion of the people buying this DLC have. So to level your Kubfu, you either have to use Pokemon in your party to battle with, camp or feed it a bunch of candies to get it to level 70 quickly so you can move on with the story. Aside from the bad level scaling, I'm not a big fan of the characters here. Look, I know they have their fans, but I really don't dig Avery or Clara's role in the story. I like the idea of sneaky characters who cheat to win, but when they're so weak you hardly even notice they cheated because you one-shot each of their Pokemon, then they just blend in with every other character. I've seen a few people compare these two to rivals like Blue and Silver, but I have to disagree here. I love the idea behind them, but the difference between Avery and, let's say, Blue is that Blue actually has a well-rounded team. Avery and Clara, by contrast, are total weaklings. I love overly confident, annoying rivals that you just want to take down, but I want them to be a worthy opponent, not just some wannabe whiny weakling. I have Shield, so my experience is with Avery, and regarding him, I feel like he's just so close to Bede's character that he doesn't really warrant existing at all. Again, I can't really speak as much for Clara because I played through Shield, but their roles are nearly identical despite some dialogue differences here or there. And altogether, they just seem rather pointless, and their little mini arc in the story lacks any significance or impact. Mustard is supposed to be the final boss and offers a bit more of a challenge than the other trainers, though I use the term challenge lightly. Of course, the first 2 times you face him, he's only using Kubfu. The final fight with Mustard is a bit more interesting. His team is much more diverse than what he's used in the past, and his Urshifu can Gigantamax. But personally, I swept him without issue and wish that he posed a little more of a challenge considering he's a renowned dojo master. However, the ease of the DLC isn't my biggest problem. So once you finish the story, you can rebattle Mustard, give Honey Watts to deck out the dojo, take on the new battle mode, and that's it. All you have left to do is fill out your Pokedex and find any remaining Diglett. Other than that, it's back to the usual raiding and breeding. And yes, the game still suffers from lag and graphical inconsistencies. I noticed this mostly in the Forest of Focus, but it happened just about everywhere on the island at one point or another. It's not enough to hinder the overall experience, and for the most part only lasts for a few seconds, but at worst it makes the game look and feel very clunky. Additionally, when I would switch between locations, the weather would still act very strange. For example, coming out of a cave, the outside may appear bright and sunny, but when you actually get outside, it's nighttime. Similarly, the weather is still bizarre. It's just not as noticeable as previously because of the Isle of Armor's size. When moving from one area to the next, you may walk from a perfectly sunny day into a sudden sandstorm, and then into a rainstorm. The size of the map helped to make weather changes less sudden, but I still wish they made these changes in weather more subtle when switching between biomes. Also noteworthy, there are still issues with battle backgrounds not matching the actual battle setting, which is honestly something that should have been fixed by now. And these are largely just aesthetics. The DLC also fails to fix much larger issues. Online is a mess and raids are as clunky as ever. I am disappointed, but I'm not surprised. With the announcement of the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra expansions, a lot of fans were excited to see what the series' first foray into DLC would bring. But after playing through the Isle of Armor, the first DLC fails to fix a good portion of features that were lacking in the base game, and doesn't bring enough good new content to make the DLC stand out on its own. If you're looking to get more out of Sword and Shield, or looking to jump back into the game after a long break, you may get a fair amount of enjoyment out of this DLC. Finishing it and filling out your Pokedex with the returning Pokemon will likely add a dozen hours of gameplay, and if you like monotype battles, then restricted sparring is likely to pose a fun new challenge for you to complete. However, I think the negatives outweigh the positives on this one. The wild area is fun to explore at first, just to see the layout of the land, but after you've seen everything it has to offer, there's nothing to do except filling out the Pokedex. The DLC doesn't fix the base game's shallowness and empty world, so though the new wild area should be what we had from the get-go, it is still very, very bland at best. I would have killed to have a breeder on the island, so I wouldn't have to travel back to the other less fleshed out wild areas from the base game. There is a severe lack of notable trainers and NPCs, and Isle of Armor suffers from all the same graphical issues as the base game. So yes, the DLC initially looks cool, but it's likely that the spectacle will quickly wear off. If the base game bothered you in any of these areas, don't come in expecting this DLC to radically change anything. Yes, there are some caves and a forest, but does it really matter if there's nothing to do inside of them? The story is insultingly easy. The writing and characters aren't very interesting to boot, so I can't say that I feel fulfilled having taken on the dojo challenge. To me, the story and many of the added features feel like they were supposed to be included from the start as post-game content and not a full-on DLC. It feels very strange to have things like additional Pokemon or follower Pokemon locked behind a $30 paywall when online trading is still a nightmare. It really rubs me the wrong way. This idea that as the series goes on, we're going to be expected to pay more and more for less and less. The wild area is better than in the base game, but it lacks in every other area. The additions are welcome, but most of them should have been in the game to begin with, or added in as a free update. The story is terribly short and still manages to feel repetitive and boring at times. I'm glad we can Gigantamax Pokemon without having to hunt them in raids. I'm glad we can have follower Pokemon again. I'm glad they added in restricted sparring, but I don't understand why none of this was in the game to begin with. For that reason, I think I'd have to give the expansion a 4 out of 10. As it stands, on its own, Isle of Armor would not be worth the price tag. If you haven't bought the DLC already and are on the fence about buying it, I would recommend holding off until Crown Tundra to see how that pans out, because what's in this expansion alone is not worth it in my opinion. Based on recent data mining, Crown Tundra is looking like it may be a much more complete experience, so here's hoping that the next DLC has more meaningful gameplay and story additions. If you're happy with the Isle of Armor and your favorite Pokemon made a return, all power to you and I'm genuinely happy for you. Keep playing it, but for now, I think I'm much more excited for a new Pokemon Snap than any DLC. Hey, thanks so much for watching! The writing, gameplay, and audio for this video were done a while ago, but life happened and I had to put off video editing until a few days ago. So here we are. Major thanks to Angelina for doing my avatar art and motion graphics. They are an amazing artist and you should absolutely check out all of their work. Also, thank you to Jeremy for helping me cut out a good portion of the script and do some audio work. You are a gem. You can follow me on Twitter at Emily_Rubin, and I'll be making some more content hopefully soon. So be sure to subscribe for more gaming and pop culture content.